Welcome to the Midnight Codex, where forgotten truths breathe and shadows tell their tale. Tonight, don't blink and don't look behind you.
I never thought I'd end up here, but now I have no choice. I need to write this down. Maybe, just maybe, someone will believe me when I tell them what I've seen, what I've felt. But if I don't finish this now, if I don't finish this tonight, I fear I never will. The shadows are already starting to move, and I can feel them crawling closer to me, even as I write. I've never felt so trapped. The monastery looms before me, a towering, decaying structure hidden deep in the Italian countryside. It's as though it has been forgotten by the world, lost in time, abandoned by all. The air's thick with fog, rolling over the stone walls like a suffocating blanket, its dense, clammy fingers curling around every crevice, every crack. The stone spires that once reached towards the heavens now bend, hunched and weary, as if kneeling to the relentless passage of time. It's hard to believe this was ever a place of prayer and solace. Now it lies dormant, a forgotten relic. I've been here for days, but it feels like years. My name is Victor De Luca. I used to be a priest. At least, that's what they called me. I wore the collar, gave the sermons, walked the halls of the church with pride. I believed in it, all of it. I thought I was doing God's work. I thought I was serving a higher purpose. But that was before the scandal. Before everything came crashing down. The church, the faith I had given everything for, turned its back on me. I turned my back on it too. I had no choice. It was either leave or remain in the ruins of my own soul. I chose to leave. Now I wander. No purpose, no direction, just empty silence. Then came the letter. It was sealed with the Vatican's mark, delivered in a plain white envelope. The words were simple. We have need of you. The church has fallen silent, and only you can guard the ancient gate. The gate must not remain unguarded. It wasn't much to go on. A cryptic note, no explanation, just a command. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was my chance to redeem myself, perhaps. A way to escape my past, or at least bury it. The pay was generous, too generous to pass up. I thought it would be a simple job, a chance to disappear for a while, to stay out of sight, to forget. I never imagined it would be anything more. I never imagined I would be guarding a gate that would become a prison for me. The journey to the monastery was long and uneventful. The countryside stretched endlessly in front of me, the mountains in the distance casting long shadows over the land. I didn't know what I expected when I arrived, but this was different from what I had imagined. The gate was old, far older than anything I had ever seen. It was a heavy iron door, weathered and rusted from centuries of neglect, adorned with strange, ancient symbols carved deep into the metal. I had never seen anything like it. It looked almost alive. I couldn't explain it, but standing before it, I felt a pull, something deep in my chest, like a heartbeat I couldn't ignore. Father Elio, the Vatican representative who had met me here, handed me a set of rules when I arrived. His eyes were dark, almost hollow, and there was a weight in his voice as he spoke. Do not take this lightly, he said, his tone grave. This place is not what it seems. The rules must be followed, without exception. I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but as he handed me the paper with the strange rules written on it, I felt a flicker of unease. He left without another word, his presence lingering in the air long after he had gone. The rules were simple, at least they seemed that way at first. Never leave the gate unguarded after dusk. If the temperature drops below freezing, do not leave your post. Do not make eye contact with the shadows that move beyond the gate. If the bell tolls, do not attempt to investigate. Never leave the monastery grounds before sunrise. I scoffed at them. I thought they were nothing more than precautions, meaningless guidelines meant to keep me from straying too far from my duty. The more I read, the more ridiculous they seemed. But something about the way Father Elio had looked at me, the way his voice had trembled with a warning I couldn't quite place, made me hesitate. The first night was uneventful. I stood at the gate, the cold night air biting at my skin, and watched the fog roll in. There was something oddly peaceful about it. The silence of the monastery was heavy, oppressive even. But I welcomed it. I welcomed the isolation. But then, as the hours dragged on, the temperature began to drop. Slowly at first, and then all at once. It wasn't the chill of nightfall, but a deep, unnatural cold that settled into my bones. I shivered and glanced at the gate, uneasy. I tried to dismiss it as nothing, but then I saw it. A shadow, moving, stretching, reaching beyond the gate. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, but my body remained still, as if frozen in place. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I had imagined it. But the shadow, no, it wasn't just a shadow, was there, undeniable. I remember the rule. Do not make eye contact with the shadows that move beyond the gate, but I couldn't look away. My gaze was locked on the shadow, something pulling me toward it. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't my imagination. Something, someone, was there. Then, the bell tolled. It was faint at first, a soft chime in the distance. But as it grew louder, closer, I realized it wasn't a sound I had ever heard before. It wasn't like any bell I had ever heard in a church. This was different, hollow, dark. I thought about the rule. Do not investigate. But the sound, the bell, was calling to me. I should have walked away. I should have followed the rules, but I didn't. I approached the gate, slowly, reluctantly, and that's when I felt it. The pulse of energy vibrating beneath my skin, making my heart race. The whispers began. They were soft at first, just faint murmurs, but then they grew louder, closer. I heard them as if they were in my very mind. Victor, come closer. I should have run. I should have turned and fled, but my body refused to obey. The whispers were too loud, too real. My feet moved on their own, carrying me toward the gate, toward the shadow. The gate creaked, groaned under the pressure, as if something on the other side was pushing against it. I realized then, the gate was not a gate at all. It was a barrier, a boundary, and it was about to break. I stood frozen before the gate, the cold biting through my coat. The last traces of sunlight faded quickly, plunging the monastery into darkness. The unsettling feeling from earlier, the one that made my skin crawl, the sensation of being watched, hadn't left me. I could still feel it. The shadows seemed to move at the edge of my vision, creeping in from all directions just out of reach. I fought the urge to turn around, to check if something, was behind me. The air felt heavier now, more suffocating. It was in this silence, this thick, oppressive darkness, that Father Elio arrived. His presence was almost expected, but it didn't make the situation any less eerie. He walked towards me slowly, his footsteps muffled by the thick fog that rolled in from the hills. "This is where you will stand," he said, his voice breaking the silence but only deepening the tension. "This is where you will guard." I nodded, unsure of what else to say. The weight of the moment pressed down on me like an anvil. This was not what I had expected. Father Elio's eyes met mine, sharp and unwavering. He handed me a scroll, its edges frayed with age, the ink faded, but still readable. The parchment seemed too ancient, too fragile for something this important. "These are the rules," he continued, his tone darker now. "The rules you must follow. They are not to be taken lightly, Victor. You may think them trivial, but they are not. Disobey, and the consequences—" He paused, the silence hanging between us, the weight of his words sinking in. "The consequences are far worse than you can imagine." I took the scroll, unrolling it with trembling hands. The rules written in neat, elegant script seemed like they belonged to another time, another world. But there was something about them, something unsettling, that made my chest tighten. Rule 1. Never allow the gate to remain open after sunset. It must always be guarded at night. I glanced at the gate, the heavy iron structure looming in front of me. The words seemed absurd, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something would happen if the gate were left unguarded. Rule 2. If the temperature drops below freezing, do not step away from your post, no matter what. Remain at the gate. This rule puzzled me. Why would I have to stay out in the cold? The monastery was vast. There were places to seek shelter. The thought of standing in the cold all night seemed insane, but there was no room for questions. Not now, not here. Rule 3. Do not make eye contact with any shadows that move beyond the gate. Shadows? The first time I saw them, I thought they were a trick of the light, but now they felt real. The idea of shadows moving on their own beyond the gate felt surreal, almost impossible. Rule 4. If the bell tolls, do not attempt to investigate the source of the sound. The bell. The strange tolling I had heard earlier. It had to be coming from the monastery, but why couldn't I investigate? It didn't make sense. Rule 5. Under no circumstances must you leave the monastery grounds before sunrise. I couldn't understand this rule. What harm could come from leaving early? What was so important about the sunrise? I handed the scroll back to him, my hands still shaking, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. But Father Elio's expression was unreadable. He simply nodded, taking the scroll and tucking it into his robe. You will understand soon enough, he said, turning on his heel and walking away, leaving me alone at the gate. I stood there, gripping the edges of the iron gate, trying to steady my breath. I felt the weight of the rules hanging over me, each one like a chain, binding me to this place. The darkness deepened, and with it, the cold. I pulled my coat tighter around my body, trying to keep warm, but it didn't help. The chill seemed to seep into my bones, as if the very air was working against me. And then, I saw it again. The shadows. They stretched across the ground, curling and twisting in ways that defied logic. It wasn't just my imagination. I could see them moving, shifting in the dim light, extending far beyond the gate. My heart raced as I remembered Rule 3. Do not make eye contact with any shadows that move beyond the gate. I forced myself to look away, but the feeling of something watching me remained. The air grew colder still, the silence more profound. Every nerve in my body was on edge, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was waiting just beyond the gate. And then it came. The toll of the bell. It was distant at first, a low, hollow sound that vibrated through the monastery. But as it echoed, the sound grew louder, closer. It wasn't the normal chime of a church bell. It was something different, something wrong. I remembered Rule 4. Do not attempt to investigate the source of the sound. But the sound seemed to call me. I wanted to go toward it. I wanted to know what was causing it. But the rules, those damn rules, kept me rooted to the spot. I couldn't move. The shadows seemed to grow darker, more sinister. I felt a presence behind me, something cold and heavy, like a hand resting on my shoulder. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't break the rules. The bell tolled again. I stayed still, frozen in place, the weight of the night pressing down on me. The monastery, the gate, the rules, everything around me felt wrong. I was trapped in a place I didn't understand, caught between my doubts and the terrifying certainty that something worse than I could ever imagine was waiting for me. The monastery was unnervingly quiet. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your ears, a soundless hum that filled every corner of the stone walls, making every footstep feel like an intrusion into something far older than the world itself. The only sounds were the faint rustling of the wind outside, its icy tendrils scraping against the ancient wood of the monastery, and the occasional creak of the timbers in the walls, as if the building itself were breathing. I stood at my post, the heavy iron gate looming in front of me. It was a sight I had already grown used to, yet it never failed to unsettle me. The gate seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its dark surface gleaming faintly under the cold light of the moon. I kept my eyes trained on it, determined to adhere to the rules Father Elio had set. I had no choice. I couldn't break them. But as the night stretched on, something started to change. The air grew heavier. The temperature, which had been chilly at first, began to plummet. The cold was no longer a mere discomfort. It was suffocating. The wind that had been softly howling outside was now a low, almost imperceptible whisper, sneaking into the cracks of the gate and curling around my feet like an ancient, invisible presence. The kind of cold that didn't just freeze the skin, but chilled the very marrow of your bones. I glanced up at the dark sky. The moon was barely visible through the thick clouds, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. Everything seemed to be enveloped in a layer of shadow, as if the world itself were being consumed by it. The night was deepening, the minutes slipping by unnoticed. But then, as the last rays of the dying light vanished, I began to notice something strange. The shadows. At first, I thought it was just the angle of the moonlight playing tricks on me. But when I blinked, they were still there, stretching unnaturally long across the ground, curling and twisting as though they were alive. They seemed to grow, shifting in ways that defied the logic of light and dark. I could see them moving, but not in any way I had ever known. It was as though they had their own purpose, their own rhythm, separate from the world around them. I quickly looked away, my breath catching in my throat. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. There was a deep sense of unease crawling up my spine, something darker than the shadows themselves. I reminded myself of Rule 3. Do not make eye contact with any shadows that move beyond the gate. I had no idea why this rule existed. I didn't understand what could be so dangerous about shadows. They were just shadows, right? Yet the way they moved, the way they seemed to slither and stretch unnaturally, made my chest tighten with dread. As I tried to focus on the gate, the temperature dropped further. The cold seeped into my skin, making my teeth chatter. It was as if the night was intentionally trying to freeze me in place, to test my resolve. I rubbed my hands together, trying to bring some warmth back to my body, but it did little to ease the chill gnawing at my bones. Then I heard it. The bell. It tolled once, a deep, hollow sound that seemed to reverberate through the very ground beneath me. I froze. I remembered Rule 4. Do not attempt to investigate the source of the sound. The toll of the bell echoed across the grounds, its resonance almost unsettling. It sounded far away, distant, yet somehow close, as if it were coming from within the monastery itself, from deep inside the stone walls. It felt wrong. I wanted to move toward the bell, to understand what had caused it, but the rules, the damn rules, kept me rooted to the spot. I swallowed hard, my heart racing in my chest. The tolling stopped, but the lingering sound of it seemed to vibrate in the air, pressing down on me, suffocating the night. I stared at the gate again, my mind racing. There was something behind it, something I couldn't see but could feel, a presence, cold and ancient, waiting, and it was not content to remain on the other side of the iron bars. I could sense it, as if it were pressing against the gate, trying to break through, trying to reach me. The shadows continued to stretch, their forms twisting in and out of my peripheral vision. My mind couldn't make sense of them. They were too strange, too alien to be mere tricks of the light. They moved as if they had a life of their own, as if they were not bound by the same laws that governed the world I knew. They seemed to slither, to shift, growing longer and more grotesque by the second. My breath came out in shallow gasps. I wanted to look away, to shut my eyes, to forget about the shadows and the gate and the tolling bell. But something in me refused to let go. I had to stay vigilant. I had to follow the rules. I was the one who had been chosen to guard this gate, this ancient boundary, and I could not fail. But that wasn't the only thing gnawing at me. Number. It was the whispers. They began faintly, just a soft rustling of sound that might have been the wind, but it wasn't. It was something else, a low murmur coming from beyond the gate. Words, but not words I could understand. They seemed to crawl into my mind, brushing against the edges of my thoughts, the syllables twisted and forgotten, like fragments of a language lost to time. I couldn't make sense of them, but I felt their presence. They were real, and they were getting closer. I pressed my hand against the cold iron of the gate, trying to steady myself, trying to force my mind to focus. But the whispers were becoming louder now, their tone shifting, darker, more urgent, as though they were calling to me, beckoning me closer. Stay at your post. The thought echoed in my mind, as if the rules themselves were speaking to me, reminding me of my oath. But I wasn't sure I could hold out much longer. The urge to leave, to run from the gate, to escape this creeping terror, was becoming overwhelming. My heart raced, the coldness gnawing at me, the shadows twisting just out of view, and the whispers growing louder. They were beckoning, pulling at my will. I wanted to move. I wanted to break free from the invisible chains that bound me to this cursed post. And then I heard it. A sound, soft at first, but unmistakable. The groan of metal. The gate. It was moving. I stepped back, my breath hitching in my throat, my heart pounding. The gate. It was groaning, as though something on the other side was pushing against it, something powerful, something desperate. The whispers grew into frantic, unintelligible murmurs, louder now, clawing at my mind. Come closer, help me, let me through. I froze, my feet planted firmly in place. I could feel the gate shaking beneath my touch, the ancient iron protesting against whatever force was pushing from the other side. And then I saw it. A figure in the shadows. It moved with a fluidity that no human could possess, stepping closer to the gate. The air around it shimmered with an unnatural energy, a dark aura that made my stomach churn. My heart pounded in my chest as the figure came closer. It was not human. I could feel it. The air around it buzzed with something ancient, something inhuman. And it was waiting for me. The first few nights had been unsettling, but nothing compared to what happened next. The monastery, once just cold and eerie, was now alive with a sinister force. The air grew heavier each night, filled with an unnatural chill that seeped into my bones. The bell, once distant, now tolled at odd hours, its sound growing louder, closer, until it felt as though it was reverberating from within the walls of the monastery itself, shaking the very ground beneath me. Each time the bell tolled, I could feel the weight of the monastery's ancient history pressing down on me. The night had become more than just cold and silent. It had become a living, breathing entity. The shadows that moved around the gate were no longer just figments of my imagination. They were real, and they were growing stronger with each passing hour. On the third night, the cold became unbearable. It was as if the monastery itself had turned against me, its walls closing in with the weight of centuries of secrets. I stood by the gate, clutching the iron bars tightly as the temperature dropped further. My breath turned to mist in front of me, and the darkness seemed to deepen, swallowing the light of the moon. The wind howled through the cracks in the monastery's walls, but there was something different about it now. The wind didn't just chill, it seemed to whisper. I glanced up and froze. There was a figure standing in the corner of my vision, barely visible in the shadows. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but as I focused, the figure became clearer. A pale, thin creature, almost skeletal, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. But it was there, watching. I turned away quickly, my heart hammering in my chest, but I could still feel its presence. It was like a weight, pressing on my back, urging me to look again. When I turned, the figure was gone, but the shadows stretched further than before, longer and darker. The wind seemed to howl louder, more insistent now. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. My mind screamed at me to break the rules, to look away, to leave, to run. But I couldn't. I had made my choice when I accepted the job. I had taken the oath to guard this place, and I couldn't leave. Not yet. The bell tolled again, louder this time, the sound echoing through the monastery's empty halls. My body stiffened, and I found myself drawn toward the sound. It was as though the bell was calling me, beckoning me to investigate, to see what lay beyond. But I remembered Rule 4. Do not attempt to investigate the source of the sound. I forced myself to turn away from the tolling bell, gripping the cold iron gate even harder. The shadows outside seemed to stretch farther, moving in ways that didn't make sense. They twisted and shifted, but never came closer, never crossed the threshold of the gate. I could feel them, though, lingering just beyond my sight. Waiting. The temperature dropped even more, and I shivered violently, wrapping my arms around myself for warmth. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the horrors I was beginning to see. The shadows, the creatures, the tolling bell. It was all becoming too much. But something inside me told me that it was only just beginning. It wasn't until the fourth night that the true nature of the gate began to reveal itself. The temperature had dropped so low that my breath froze in the air before me. I was struggling to stay awake, my eyes heavy with exhaustion, but I couldn't let myself fall asleep. The rules were clear: never leave the post, never break the oath. But the longer I stood there, the more I felt the weight of the silence and of the waiting. Something was coming. I couldn't explain why, but I could feel it. The gate wasn't just a barrier. It was something far darker, far older than I had ever imagined. The gate groaned, a low, haunting sound that sent a chill up my spine. Something was moving behind it, something trying to break free. The air around it seemed to thrum with an unnatural energy, a pulse that grew stronger with each passing second. That was when I saw it. At first it was just a glimpse, just a flicker of movement behind the gate, something shifting in the shadows. But as I looked closer, my heart skipped a beat. There were figures, large and grotesque, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. They were more than just shadows. They were real. Creatures, demons, caught between worlds, pressing against the gate. Their forms were monstrous, twisted, their bodies writhing like serpents as they tried to break free. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I couldn't believe it. These creatures, these demons, had been trapped behind the gate for centuries, and now they were clawing to get out. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. They weren't just waiting to escape. They were waiting for me to make a choice. They wanted me to open the gate. They wanted me to release them. But I knew I couldn't. I couldn't open it. I had been chosen to guard this place, to keep them trapped. The rules were clear. But the sight of those creatures, their eyes locked onto mine, filled me with an overwhelming fear. They were not beasts to be killed. They were remnants of something ancient. A war between good and evil that had been forgotten, lost to time. The next morning, I sought out Father Elio. I needed answers. My mind was reeling from what I had seen the night before. The creatures behind the gate were not just demons. They were something far more terrifying. When I found him, he was sitting in the main hall, his eyes closed, as if waiting for me. "You saw them, didn't you?" Father Elio said, his voice calm but heavy with sorrow. I nodded, my throat tight. "What are they? Why are they there?" Father Elio sighed deeply, as though he had been expecting this moment. "The gate was built long ago, Victor, not as a simple prison, but as a barrier to hold something far worse than mere beasts. The demons behind that gate were once part of an ancient war, a war between the forces of light and darkness. They were sealed away by the early church, but over time the purpose of the gate was forgotten. The demons, they are remnants of that war. The gate is not just a prison, it is the last defense against the darkness that once nearly consumed the world." I felt my stomach churn. The demons behind the gate weren't just mindless monsters. They were remnants of a war that had shaped the very foundations of good and evil. They had been trapped here, locked away by those who had long since disappeared. And now, they were waiting for someone to let them out. "But why me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why did they choose me to guard the gate?" Father Elio's gaze softened. "You were chosen because you are the one who can face the darkness without being consumed by it. The gate will never open unless you allow it, Victor. The choice is yours. You must decide whether to keep them trapped behind that gate or to release them and risk unleashing a darkness far worse than you can imagine." I stood there, speechless. The weight of his words settled heavily on me. The fate of the world was in my hands, and I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to make the right choice. The nights had grown worse. The air, once bitterly cold, now felt as though it had a life of its own, thick and suffocating, wrapping itself around me like a shroud. Every night the whispers grew louder, more insistent, their words barely discernible, yet unmistakable. They slithered into my mind, scratching at the edges of my thoughts, urging me to listen, to break the rules. They promised me power, freedom, release. The shadows, once distant, had grown bolder. They were no longer just flickers at the edges of my vision, but dark, moving shapes that seemed to stretch and twist in the corners of the monastery, following my every step. And the gate. The gate had begun to groan under an unseen weight, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. On one particularly cold night, the wind howled like a wounded animal, and the temperature dropped to unbearable levels. My breath came out in ragged clouds, and I could feel the cold gnawing at my bones. I stood at my post, my hands numb as I gripped the cold iron of the gate. But tonight, something felt different. The air around me crackled, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. It was as if the very monastery itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stared at the gate, the thick rusted iron bars casting long shadows that seemed to reach across the courtyard. And then, I heard it. A low groan, like the sound of ancient wood splintering under pressure. The gate moved. At first, I thought it was a trick of the wind, the metal shifting in the cold. But as I watched, I saw it clearly. The gate was moving on its own. Slowly, inch by inch, it creaked open. The sound was deafening, the groan of the iron reverberating through the air, sending a chill straight to my spine. I stepped back, my heart racing, as the gap between the gates widened. The shadows beyond seemed to surge forward, stretching toward me as if they were alive. I felt the weight of the rules press down on me, but I couldn't ignore it any longer. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The gate. It was never just a barrier. It was a doorway, a threshold between our world and something far darker. My mind raced with conflicting thoughts. The rules, the oath I had sworn. If I followed them, I would never know what lay beyond that gate. I would never understand the truth, the power that the demons whispered about, the freedom they promised me. But if I broke the oath, if I allowed the gate to open fully, I would be defying everything I had promised, everything I had sworn to protect. And the consequences were unknown, but I could feel them, looming just beyond reach, like the darkness beyond the gate. I stepped closer to the gate, my hand shaking as I reached out to touch the cold metal. The shadows moved with me, sliding over the ground like liquid darkness, stretching toward my feet. As I touched the gate, I felt it, an overwhelming force, a pulse of energy so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if the demons beyond the gate could sense my hesitation. I took another step forward, and that was when I saw it. A figure, tall and dark, standing just beyond the threshold. Its outline was indistinct, shifting like smoke, but there was no mistaking it. It was a demon. The figure stepped forward, emerging from the shadows with a grace that was both terrifying and hypnotic. Its eyes gleamed like molten lava, its skin pale and smooth, its body impossibly tall and thin, like a shadow-given form. The air around it seemed to warp, bending and twisting with a strange, unsettling energy. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The demon's voice came, low and resonant, like the sound of thunder before a storm. "You have done well, Victor," it said, its voice echoing in my mind. "You've kept the gates shut, even as the shadows have clawed at your soul. But now the choice is yours." The demon took another step forward, its gaze never leaving mine. "I am Lucifer's right hand," it said, the words dripping with venom, "and I offer you a choice. A choice." The weight of those words hung in the air, suffocating me, pulling at the edges of my mind. The demon was offering me power, freedom, a way out of this hellish existence I had found myself in. It was tempting, so tempting, but I knew better. "You can break your oath," the demon continued, its voice smooth like silk. "You can free us from our prison. You can let us out, and in return, you will be granted power beyond your wildest dreams. You will never again be bound by the chains of your past. The world will bend to your will." It leaned closer, its eyes glowing with an intensity that made my stomach churn. Or, you can remain here, Victor. You can keep the gate shut, keep guarding it, but know this, you will never be free. The demons beyond this gate will never rest, and you will be trapped in this cycle, guarding the gate for eternity. The choice was clear, but it felt impossible. My mind screamed at me to take the power, to break the oath, and free myself from this nightmare. I could feel the demon's pull, its promises of power, of freedom, tugging at me like a siren's call. But I couldn't. I had sworn an oath. I had taken on the responsibility of guarding this gate. I couldn't betray that. I couldn't let these creatures loose upon the world. But even as I made that decision, something deep within me wavered. The demon's offer was tempting. It offered freedom. It offered power. But the price was my soul. I felt my legs trembling beneath me as the shadows pressed in, their dark fingers reaching out, pulling at me, urging me to step through the threshold. The demon's gaze burned into me, its presence suffocating. And for a moment, I thought I might give in. The temptation was too great. But then, the air shifted. The whispers grew louder, the toll of the bell ringing in my ears like a warning. The gate creaked, and the shadows recoiled, pulling back as if repelled by an unseen force. I stepped back, shaking my head. Number I couldn't. Not like this, not for power, not for freedom at the cost of everything I had sworn to protect. I will not break my oath, I said, my voice hoarse, trembling but firm. I will not release you. You will remain behind that gate. The demon stared at me, its eyes narrowing in contempt. The air grew colder, the shadows more restless, as if the very ground beneath me was trembling with rage. So be it, the demon hissed, its voice filled with fury. But know this, Victor, you will pay the price for your choice. There is no escaping the consequences of defying us. With that, the demon vanished into the shadows, leaving only the cold silence behind. The gate groaned again, as if in response to the demon's words. The shadows remained, swirling in the corners of my vision, but I had made my choice. I had upheld my oath, but at what cost? The monastery had become a prison, a labyrinth of shadows and whispers, its walls now echoing with the angry pounding of the demons behind the gate. I could feel them clawing at it, their presence growing stronger, more tangible. The air was thick with their malice, every breath I took like inhaling a cloud of smoke. The gate groaned and rattled, as though something on the other side was desperate to get through. The very foundations of the monastery trembled, as if the world itself was splitting apart at the seams. I had made my choice. But now, as the night deepened and the shadows closed in around me, I could feel the full weight of that decision crashing down on me. My mind, once steady, was unraveling. Doubt swirled like a storm, tearing through my thoughts. Had I made the right choice? Or had I condemned myself and the world to something far worse? The bell tolled again, louder than before. The sound echoed through the air, vibrating in my chest, filling the empty halls of the monastery with an oppressive hum. It was no longer just a warning. It was a summons. I had sworn to guard the gate, but now I wasn't so sure anymore. The gate, the barrier between our world and the demons beyond, was no longer just a structure. It was alive with an energy that seeped into my bones, making every movement feel like a struggle. The shadows had become more than just images. They were tangible now, reaching for me with cold, bony fingers, clawing at the edges of my vision. I stood by the gate, my hands trembling as I gripped the cold metal bars. The air had turned deathly still, the whispers fading into silence. The creatures beyond the gate were waiting, their hunger palpable, their desire to be free almost overwhelming. I could hear them, feel them, pressing against the gate, pushing, clawing, trying to break through. You chose this. The voice in my head seemed to mock me, a cruel whisper carried by the wind. You chose to protect them. Now they're coming for you. I shook my head, trying to clear the thought, but it clung to me like a sickness. The weight of the oath, the responsibility I had taken on, seemed to crush me. The air around me grew thicker, heavier, as if the monastery itself were holding its breath. The shadows began to stretch farther, their dark tendrils inching closer, wrapping around me, pulling me toward the gate. I heard the first creak of the gate, the low groan of metal against metal. It was moving, slowly, steadily, as though something on the other side was pushing against it with all its might. The gate wasn't just rattling anymore. It was alive, groaning with the strain of something far beyond human comprehension. Do not let them out. The voice in my head was clearer now, more insistent, like the sound of 1,000 voices all speaking at once. I couldn't stop it. I had sworn to keep the gate closed, to prevent what lay beyond from ever crossing into our world. But now, the weight of the decision, the weight of the choice I had made, pressed down on me like a vice, threatening to tear me apart. I could feel the gate weakening. The vibrations in the metal grew stronger, more frantic. The demons were getting closer. They were almost free. The sound of their growling, their shrieks began to fill the air, making my blood run cold. And then, in that moment of pure terror, something shifted. A figure stepped from the shadows. At first, I thought it was just another manifestation of the darkness, a trick of the mind. But as the figure emerged from the shadows, I saw its form clearly. It was tall, impossibly so, its eyes glowing with a cold fire. It stood perfectly still, but I could feel its presence, the weight of it pressing down on me, suffocating me. "I see you've finally come to face your decision," the figure said, its voice low and resonant, like the sound of a bell tolling in the distance. I gasped, recognizing the voice. My heart sank into my stomach. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It can't be." The figure stepped closer, its form shifting as it moved, like smoke twisting and curling around a flame. Its eyes never left me, and I could feel the weight of its gaze deep within my soul. "I am Lucifer's right hand," it said, its voice filled with cold amusement. "And now, the choice you made will have consequences, Victor." I shook my head, taking a step back, but my legs were heavy as though they were no longer my own. The demon's presence was suffocating, pulling me closer to it, drawing me in as if I were a moth to a flame. "You were given a choice," Lucifer's right hand continued, "and you chose to remain loyal, to protect the gate. But did you ever consider what lies beyond it? What you are protecting?" I stared at the demon, fear rising in my chest. I had sworn to protect the gate. I had sworn to keep the demons trapped inside. But now, as I stood face to face with the creature that had been whispering to me from the shadows, I began to question everything. What was I truly protecting? Was it the world, or was it something else entirely? The gate groaned again, louder this time. I could hear the demons, no, the creatures, pounding against it, their claws scraping against the metal. The pull to open it, to release them, was overwhelming. I felt myself drawn to the gate, as if the very fabric of my being was being torn in two. "You can open the gate, Victor," the demon whispered, stepping closer still. "You can let them out. You can unleash their power. All I ask is for your loyalty, your soul." I could feel it now, the temptation, the pull of power, the promise of freedom. The world beyond the gate, the demons, the horrors. They all whispered to me, calling my name, promising everything I had ever wanted. But at what cost? "You can release them," the demon continued, "or you can stay true to your oath and remain here, guarding the gate. But know this, Victor. Either way, you will pay the price. There is no escape." The words echoed in my mind, and for a moment I was frozen, caught between two worlds. The gate loomed before me, the whispers and the growls of the demons growing louder. The shadow of the past, the shadow of my choices, pressed down on me, suffocating me. And then the decision came. It wasn't a choice I wanted to make. It wasn't a decision I ever thought I would have to face, but I knew what I had to do. I took a step toward the gate, my hand outstretched. The demon's eyes gleamed with anticipation, as if it knew what was coming. The gate creaked open, the metal groaning under the weight of the power it was about to unleash. And then, just as I touched the cold iron, the world went dark. The sound of the bell tolled one last time. The darkness consumed me. I was supposed to protect the gate, I thought, as I was drawn into the abyss. But now, the gate is protecting something else, something worse.